fMRI による脳内思考の可視化で、自由意志や意識は確実に存在する。NCS ノーコピーライトサウンドチャンネルが管理するアラン・ウォーカーフェード NCS リリースはクリエイティブコモンズ著作権表示必須ライセンス再利用を許可するが宣言されており、そのためこの映像にも使用させていただきました。リュネ・デカルトが提唱した心身二元論は古代ギリシャの哲学者たちも解けずに人類最大の謎として現在も引き継がれている。養老孟司、 1937年11月11日生まれは、日本の解剖学者であり東京大学名誉教授。自身の著書バカの壁は歴代ベストセラー4位。養老孟先生が人間行為に先行するリベット実験での脳の準備原因について講演されていたとき、講演に来ていた学生を壇上に呼び寄せて、学生に向かって、君の好きなタイミングで自分の席に戻るように指示された。学生が席に戻ると、先生は、最初に踏み出した足は左右のどちらかと聞かれた。学生は、多分と言いながら、左右のどちらかを答えた。先生は、続けて、人間行為に先行する脳の準備原因発信がピークに達したとしても、その行為は必ずしも実行されず、その場面での抑制や撤回が起きる脳の発生源が今も特定されないとして、どのような脳回路が形成されて始動し、抑制や撤回に至るのかの手がかりが全くないことを指して、まるで超能力によって抑制や撤回が起きているかのようだと解説しておられた。この問題は、ルネ・デカルトの心身二元論とも称される。ルネ・デカルト、1596年3月31日から1650年2月11日没は、フランス生まれの哲学者、数学者。この心身二元論は、古代ギリシャの哲学者たちも解けずに、人類最大の謎として今日まで持ち越されてきた。しかし、量子力学が1900年頃に発見され、1925年代になってようやく整理された。自由意志や意識は、唯物科学では説明不能だが、量子力学には、意志や意識を解明する可能性がある。それまでは、マクロな通常世界は、空間上に、明確な占有域を有し、明確な形態を有する物質相互の運動連鎖によって、物事全般の事象は起きるとされてきたが、1925年代に整理された量子力学では、マクロ世界と同時に存在するミクロな微小世界では、それぞれ異質な性質があるとした。量子力学の微細粒子群の存在状態は、マクロ世界とは違って、同時に複数の位置を占めて、確たる位置を持たず、人間の観測によって、運動の様相が変化し、同一粒子から分離した粒子同士は、何光年もの遠距離に離れても、瞬時に相関する性質を持つ。このようなことから、量子力学は、人間の自由意志を説明できる可能性があるとされるが、2022年8月の参議院議員選挙へ出馬表明をされている茂木健一郎氏は、量子力学の本質はランダムだから、人間の自由意志は法一になるなどと言われるが、本質はランダムでも、技術分野では、半導体の利用など、微細領域でのテクノロジーのほとんどは、量子力学を基礎として成り立っており、パソコンや携帯電話や電子工学、レーザー発信あるいは超電導などは、量子力学を基礎として展開している。
Okay, so it's time to let your trousers down. Let's face it, we all have a couple of secrets, yeah? Everyone has a secret, and I'd like to invite you to participate in a simple experiment right now. I'd like you to think of one of your secrets. Just think about it, conjure it up, the image in your mind. Now, we tend to think that these secrets are secret. Nobody knows about them. You would think that because it's in your mind doesn't mean that your neighbor sitting next to you can understand or know about your secret. And that's what I want to challenge here. I want to ask the question about whether your privacy is real the way you feel it. Now, your secret might be something mundane. It might be something simple, such as, for example, the PIN of your credit card. It could be something embarrassing you don't want people to know, for example. It could be that you enjoy watching funny cat movies on the internet. Something like that. So, is it possible to read out these thoughts? Well, in fact, we can tell about a person's mental states to some degree, about their feelings, from their body language, from the expressions on their faces. If you look at these famous Ekman faces here, you can see that our facial expressions give away what we feel But this is still severely limited. If you look at the person on the left, obviously she's surprised, but what is she surprised about? What is she looking at? What is she hearing? What is surprising her? We don't know. We can't tell this from the surface of the body, from the body language and from the face. We somehow need to go deeper. And deeper here means we need to go into that part of the body that encodes, that stores your thoughts, and that is the human brain. Now, I'm a brain scientist, and for many years, brain scientists have established fact after fact about the brain, and one thing that's always shown up is that our thoughts are intimately related to brain processes. So it should, in theory, be possible, if I put someone in a brain scanner, to find out what they're thinking. The question, though, is, how do I know to interpret the language of the brain? I somehow need to translate it. I need to, when I want to read it out, I need some understanding of the way the information is stored. So a simple analogy can help us here. And we can think of the way in which information is stored on the surface of a CD. How does this work? Well, it's the pattern of pits on the surface of the CD that codes a piece of information, say, for example, about a piece of music. One piece of music, one pattern on the surface, a different piece of music, a different pattern on the surface. And this is very similar to the way your brain stores information. It stores your thoughts in spatial patterns of brain activity. So how can we read these out? How do we know what the spatial patterns of your brain activity are? For this we use so-called brain scanners. It's a technology known as MRI, magnetic resonance imaging, and it basically involves very strong magnetic fields. It doesn't do you any harm, but it gives you a quite well-resolved map of your brain activity. So that's what we do. My job is, people come to my lab at the Charité here in Berlin, and we put people in brain scanners, we read out their brain activity patterns, and then we get something that looks like this, a brain image. Now, don't confuse these brain images with photographs. They're not photographs. They're not like an accurate, perfect depiction of some spatial event. What they show is a spatial map of probability. It tells you most likely this part of the brain is involved in some kind of thought. You can see some regions that are hot-colored, red, orange. They are regions that become more active than usual when you engage in specific thought. And the cold areas, the blue areas, are where the activity is lower than normal. But what does this specific pattern of brain activity mean? Does anyone know what this person is currently thinking about? What do you think? It's difficult. It doesn't say on there, this person is thinking about the Brandenburg Gate or something like that. It's not written in there. Instead, it's an abstract code that the brain uses. And this is something that's quite familiar to us. We know this. People faced this problem over 200 years ago. In fact, when they encountered the hieroglyphs. People 200 years ago were puzzled by the hieroglyphs. They didn't know what the hieroglyphs mean. They saw this on the pyramids. Some people must have said, that must be like a pretty wallpaper. But instead, others might have said, I think this actually means something. But what does it mean? What do you think this means? It's a very similar problem. What does this mean, like the brain image? You can't know. Well, I can tell you, this one here means brain, as you might have guessed. But how do we know this? I don't have any ancient Egyptians in my family. How do I know this? It's because people stumbled on a translation. In 1799, someone found a translation, the famous Rosetta Stone that you can see in the British Museum in London. And this famous Rosetta Stone contains a text in hieroglyphs and a text in ancient Greek and Demotic as well. That wasn't quite so much of interest. So this allowed us to translate the hieroglyphs into ancient Greek, a language that people did know to understand. Now, this now makes our task very simple. All we need to do is we need to find the Rosetta Stone for the brain, right? Sounds easy. So where is it? Where do we have to go and dig? Do we have to go and dig in North Africa or in Southeast Asia? Where is the Rosetta Stone for the brain going to be? Nobody so far, unfortunately, has found the Rosetta Stone for the brain. The reason is that it's very, very complicated, much more complicated than the hieroglyphs. And we need to use something different, something called code breaking. Now, in the Second World War, the Germans thought they were particularly clever by encrypting their messages on this famous Enigma machine. They took a military text, they put it through the machine, and out came some scrambled version that nobody could understand. Then in the U-boats, they would find the scrambled text, they put it through their machine, and out they get the real message. This is what you can do if you know the code. But the British were trying to decipher it, but they didn't know the code. But instead they invented brute force statistical techniques that allowed them to translate this hidden code. And that's what we do today with brain images. We try and understand what the thoughts are a person has. So how does this work in detail? I'll just give you a simple example. What you can see here are 3 images on the left the person was looking at inside a brain scanner, the Brandenburg Gate, a bouquet of flowers, and a German Shepherd dog. On the right are the corresponding patterns of brain activity, and you can see they're very different. Every thought you have has its own unique signature pattern of activity in your brain. You think one thing, you get one pattern of activity. You think something else, get a different pattern of brain activity. And now what we do is we train computers to recognize these patterns of brain activity. If I know to recognize the pattern of activity in the top right, I can tell that the person is thinking about the Brandenburg Gate. Similar to recognizing an individual based on their fingerprints. If I find the fingerprints and I have them in a database, I can use a software to detect the fingerprints out of the database. And that's what we do. We train computers, we train them to recognize these brain activity patterns, and then the computer has to prove that it's worth its money, or the program that we write is worth its money, that it can decipher what you're thinking about. And then you give the computer some pattern of brain activity. You might not know what it is, and the proof is if the computer can correctly tell what you're thinking about. This works remarkably well. If you do this simple game, you get an accuracy of up to 100%. You get it right almost every time. So this is for people in brain scanners looking at visual images. But you could say, well, if someone's in a brain scanner looking at an image, I just have to look at the image they're looking at, and I know what they're thinking about. So we need to go one step further. The next step is we just have them imagine an image. And put them in a brain scanner. We get them to imagine various things, say, for example, watches, hands, faces, all sorts of stuff, and we measure their brain activity patterns. And we can decode what they're thinking about based on pure imagination. It's just in their mind. There's nothing in their environment or on a computer screen that could give it away. They're just thinking about it. And this works incredibly well as well. But you could say, this is still rather academic. Let's look for something even more interesting. What about people's behavior, their decisions, things that are relevant? So we went ahead and did a number of studies where we tried to look at people's decisions. These were decisions, very simple decisions among a few alternatives for things that are either completely irrelevant, such as, for example, do you want to press a left or a right button, or things that are a bit more relevant, for example, do you like this car, do you want to buy it, or do you like this car, do you want to buy it? So we read the brain activity out of their brains. In the first case, we looked after they've made up their mind. So people make up their mind, we read their brain activity, we try and decipher and tell which choice they've made. Yeah? So every one of you make a choice, say for example, between wanting a BMW or a Mercedes. You make your choice. Can we read this out of your brain activity? The answer is yes, with pretty decent accuracy. The next question is, however, what about the choice itself? You're more or less free to choose between one or the other. What made you go one or the other way? So we looked backwards in time before the decision. And what we found was that you could, to some degree, predict a person's decision, a free decision. They can choose either alternative before they actually feel that they're making up their mind. Up to 7 seconds before they think they're making up your mind. So you think you're deciding now, but your brain has at least started preparing this decision 7 seconds before. How is that possible? Well, it raises an important riddle. And that is that we normally think of the sequence of events when we make choices is we decide in our mind. We don't tell anyone, we just decide. And then we use our brain to put our body into motion, for example, to tell people what we're thinking about. But this says it's quite different. This says the brain starts preparing the decision, and then your mind comes in a few seconds later, and then you start moving and doing things. This is quite different, and it raises lots of interesting questions. The most important one is, who's responsible for the action? If your conscious mind comes after the decision presumably has already been made, how can you be held responsible for the action if you commit a crime? It was my unconscious brain activity that happened before I made up my mind. It's not my fault that I committed this crime, you could say. So you can see there are lots of interesting questions raised here with respect to free will. I'm going to leave that as an open teaser. I'm going to focus on a different question. If you're interested in that, go to our website. I'm going to ask a different question, and that is, can we read people's minds in a technology that is similar now to these stage acts that people did in the 19th century? What you can see here is a depiction of a stage act. A magician draws a person from the audience. They come on a stage. They're blindfolded. They think about something, say, for example, a shape or a person, and the magician can magically read their mind and draw their thought on the board here. Can we now replace this stage act by something new? Can we put a brain scanner on the stage, and then the famous brain scanner, you put people in it, and it shows you on a board what they're thinking about? Is this possible? The answer is, to some degree, but not that well, and I'll explain to you why. First of all, there is severe limitation with the resolution of brain scanners. They have a resolution of a few millimeters, so that means in every one of these small measurement volumes we have up to 1 million nerve cells. That's a lot of nerve cells in one measurement pixel. So basically, we need to increase the resolution of these brain scanners so that we can get down to the activity of single cells if we really want to read out the full details. But there are even worse issues than this, just the resolution. One big problem is that every one of you has their own signature brain language that stores the information. You can see here 4 brain activity patterns for the same thought in 4 different individuals. They're all different. Everyone stores the information different, which explains why we have such a hard time understanding each other if our brain activity patterns are so different. And so this is a severe challenge. So we can't train a machine on one person and use it for another person. It doesn't work that well on the second person. Another problem is that preferences and thoughts change, and the brain language presumably changes as well across a lifespan. When you're young, your favorite movie might be Lassie, your favorite food might be a hamburger, and the favorite music might have been heavy metal. Come on, we're talking about secrets here. That's your secret, my secret. Okay, when you're older, things might change. Now you like schmaltzy Austrian movies, you like salad, or at least pretend to yourself that you like salad, and Bavarian brass music. Come on, admit it. So the problem is that the brain activity patterns coding this kind of information change across the lifespan, and we've got no way of dealing with this. But now the biggest problem is that we can think so many different things. One of my favorite sentences is from Monty Python. It's called, "My hovercraft is full of eels." Who would have ever thought that someone was going to think this today? If you programmed a computer to predict what you might be thinking about today, I'm pretty sure "my hovercraft was full of eels" would have been very low on that list. So we need to be able to account for these situations as well. We can think so many different things. We can think a whole dictionary full of different things. So we need a dictionary to translate thoughts into brain activity patterns, and we don't have this dictionary. So what could this look like? Do we get a subject come, we pay them very well, they come for 20 years to the brain scanner. The first day we start reading the dictionary, we begin with apple, and we continue, and after 20 years, we're finally done, we're with Z, we start reading zebra, etc. Is that how we measure the brain activity patterns for all these thoughts that they might have? Well, luckily, we can take a shortcut. And the shortcut is that the brain has arranged the information in a way that is easier for us to understand. And that is, it uses principles of similarity. And I'll explain to you how this works. You can see in the top right a hypothetical brain activity pattern while a person is thinking about a car. And the bottom right, a hypothetical brain activity pattern while they're thinking about a bike. But now we've measured in our brain scanner a different pattern, but it looks like a mixture for the pattern of a car and the pattern of a bike. What could that be? What do you think? Well, it's a motorbike. So you can exploit these principles of similarity. You don't need to know what every thought looks like in the brain, and you can still read out a large number of thoughts. Now, there are a number of technical issues ensuing from this. For example, potential lie detectors or brain marketing. Lots of people are interested in commercial applications or forensic applications of this technology and medical applications, allowing people who can't move their bodies to suddenly move and control computers and do things like that. Now, there's a big debate necessary about what of these technologies we want and what we think is ethically feasible. But one important question people are always interested in is, does it mean that now you're open to manipulation? Well, don't worry about that too much, because first of all, it would mean that you could have to put someone inside a brain scanner. So to some degree, your thoughts are private. If you're just walking through the world, nobody has a mobile brain scanner that works remotely, you can think about your PIN of your credit card, and nobody's going to be able to read it out. Don't worry about that. Now, one thing that people are still quite interested in is whether you can be manipulated. Manipulated here means, is it possible to write thoughts into a person's brain, to make them think certain things, as you can see in some science fiction movies like in Strange Days or Inception, etc. The answer is, today, this is not possible. And the reason is that the way our thoughts are coded in our brain is in very intricate, fine-grained patterns of brain activity. It's really lots of detail in these brain activity patterns. And to date, there are techniques for stimulating the brain, but they're very diffuse. And there's no technique available that would allow us to write these very detailed patterns of activity into the brain. So, brain scanners can be used to read out a person's thoughts to some degree, and don't worry about the technology, and especially you don't have to worry about people programming thoughts into your brains. Thanks very much.
自由意志や意識の発生源や成立過程は、唯物科学では説明不能だが、脳内思考の可視化など一歩ずつ進んでいる。前の映像は、人間の脳内思考で生じる想像イメージを、fMRI が画像として出力する仕組みを説明する、ドイツシャリテ医大のジョン・ディラン・ヘインズ博士の講演である。投稿者は、ドイツシャリテ医大のヘインズ博士に関する以前の投稿、英字35153は、脳の無意識が人間行動を支配するという、唯物論的解釈の論理破綻を指摘すると題する投稿で、PC ゲームを使って自由意志は否定されないとする結論の実験を主導した、と紹介している。自由意志の語句でネット検索するとトップに表示される、自由意志は存在する、ただし、ほんの 0.2 秒間だけの元になったのもヘインズ博士の実験である。ヘインズ博士が説明する映像では、被験者の前に左右2つのボタンがあり、その一つは、被験者には Go ボタンで肯定を意味し、もう一つは No ボタンで拒否を意味する。ただ、fMRI で測定すると、被験者がそのどちらかを選ぶ前に、脳の準備電位に相当する信号を、fMRI も約7秒前に検知していたとヘインズ博士は説明する。脳の電位発信検知は約 0.5 ミリ秒前だったが、fMRI は脳皮質直下の信号検知ではないために時間がかかる。人大脳初期視覚野には、網膜で受け取った情報が、視覚上の位置関係を保ったまま投射される視野再現地図と呼ばれる機能構造がある。特に、視野内の特定の位置に、高コントラストの視野刺激を提示すると、それに対応した部位での脳活動が生じることから、fMRI を用いて、非侵襲的に人大脳皮質視野再現地図を可視化できることが知られている。夢、イメージ、意識の生成は物質過程か。人間各人の思考や意思行為は、かなりの自由裁量という、多くの選択可能性を伴っていると考えられる。これは、明らかに、人間の思考から生じるイメージ、創造性によって可能になると思える。このイメージ生成は、人工知能に、いかなる指令言語と機械構造を与えても不可能であると思われる。それは、 このイメージ生成がマクロな物質過程ではないと思われるからだ。おそらく、これは人間の脳の領域を超えた非局所作用であって、人工知能の限界を一言で表す。人工知能は、なぜ自律性の兆候すら出現しないのか。外界の直接認識にはイメージは含まれない。ここにパズルの知恵の輪があり、それを解く課題が与えられた。回答者は試行錯誤を繰り返しながら、知恵の輪の形状を想像イメージで変形させて要点を探す。この想像イメージによる変形像は非現実であり仮想現実であり、これは人工知能にはできない。それは人工知能に形状変形のプログラムを与えても、そこから出力された変形像は指令された出力計算の結果であり、決して人工知能による主体的な自己企画ではない。さらに、人間のイメージ生成や客観視は非現実であり、その非現実を構成しているのは、おそらくミクロ成分と思われる。しかし、それなら、人工知能も、素材は原子分子で構成されるから、自然のミクロ域と連動してイメージ生成は可能、との指摘があるだろう。ただ、人工知能の素材は人工物であって、人間の生物的脳構造とは大きな差異があり、しかし、それ以上に、脳は人間の脳構造となるように自然が算出し構成した要因が含まれているのかもしれない。上記した意味は、人間の脳構造だけではなく生物を構成する微細な原子分子は、単なる物質の小片ではなく、その微細域には、その構成となるような自然全体の生成酸化が含まれている可能性がある。であれば、人工知能のような人工的自律性の製造は、宇宙の生成から始める必要があるのかもしれない。量子力学の革新は、実現可能性のための複合疑似実体が潜在する。量子力学の革新を説明するなら、みんなが知っているシュレーディンガーの猫の実験がふさわしい。この思考実験では、猫の精子が確率2分の1で決定するのだが、それは人間の観測が猫の精子を確定するのかという問題と、実験開始から猫の精子が確定するまでは、猫はどのような状態で存在するのかという点が問題になる。この点について、ミクロ粒子の集合体である猫の精子は、量子力学の知見では、人間による観測以前では精子混在の非決定状態であり、人間による観測によって、猫は精子混在から単一状態へと遷移するのだろうと考えられている。それでは、なぜ、ミクロ領域では、このような不可解さが存在するのだろうか。これは、投稿者がかなり以前から指摘しているが、結論から言えば、ミクロ領域において、このような複合する現象可能性が存在するのは、宇宙のマクロ構造の運動決定性に拮抗する多様的自由度が存在するからこそ、人間のような小規模構造にも自律性が生じるのだと考えられる。言い換えれば、人間や生物に付帯された自由度とは、確たる占有領域を持つ物質的構造とは違った。それに疑似するが、人間や生物が思考行動するときにのみ、その思考行動を補助するためのイメージ生成である。ミクロ域の複合する現象可能性は、人間の自由意志を成立させる。このミクロ領域の複合する現象可能性は、明らかに生物一般の自律性の根源であり、人間については、人間の思考や意思行為でのかなりの自由裁量という多くの選択可能性からの一つの選択という人間の自由意志成立の根源である。さらに、そのイメージ、創造性は生命性全般の根源でもある。
Have you been here before? If this house was a crime scene and you were a suspect, you'd say no. But what if scientists could look inside your brain and work out that you'd been to this house after all? Don't worry, they can't. Yet. But this is one possible future use of a technique called brain decoding. We'll be coming back to these rooms later. Neuroscientists often use brain scanning techniques like functional magnetic resonance imaging to see which areas of the brain are active during tasks. Brain decoding looks inside these active areas to identify more subtle patterns related to particular images or ideas. A typical study would put someone in a scanner and show them a series of pictures. For each picture, the scanner records activity in the areas of the brain responsible for vision. A computer program, the decoder, is then trained to associate each picture with its pattern. To test the decoder, a new picture is presented. The scanner records the activity again. The decoder then compares the new pattern to the pattern it knows from training to figure out what type of object the person was looking at. Some groups have gone further. Jack Gallant's lab at the University of California at Berkeley measured brain activity as their subjects watched hours of movie footage. They taught a computer program to associate the clips with brain activity patterns, as before. Then, the decoder reconstructed what the subject had seen. Based on the brain activity alone, the computer sifted through lots of video clips and produced an average, here on the right, a best guess that it thought was most similar to what the subject had seen. Decoding what people see is one thing, but how about their thoughts, or even their dreams? Here's a representation of someone's dream, decoded from his or her brain activity. It's from Yukiyasu Kamitani's lab in Kyoto, Japan. His team got people to fall asleep in a brain scanner, and then woke them up periodically and asked them what they were dreaming about. They noted down the most popular categories of object appearing in the dreams. They showed the same participants pictures of these objects when they were awake and scanned their brains again. Then they could tell what was appearing in the dreams, producing depictions like this, which make about as much sense as dreams usually do. Now back to those pretend crime scenes. Could brain decoding one day be used to extract secret thoughts or detect lies? John Dylan Haynes and his team, based in Germany, had participants walk around several of these virtual reality rooms. Nicely decorated, aren't they? Then in the scanner they showed people more rooms, ones they'd walked around before, and new ones. Using decoding methods, they were able to tell with about 80% accuracy whether a participant had seen the room before. Of course, this kit isn't ready for the courtroom just yet. What if they'd been in the house but the day before or after the crime? What if they learned to disguise the fact that they're lying? All challenges that decoders will need to consider. And anyway, says Haynes, there's a cheaper and quicker way right now to find out what someone is thinking. Just ask them.
前の映像は最近のfMRI 可視化研究のようだ。では、特定パターンの想起を行っている際の脳活動を測定することで、人間の想起内容を空間パターンとして取り出すことができるだろうか？上記の発想をもとに、世界で初めて fMRI で画像生成に成功したのは、2006年フランス INRIA のシロンナで、記録した脳神経活動を解析することで、知覚あるいは想起中の視覚体験を再現することに成功した。それ以後も、2015年サウスカロライナ医科大学のナセラリスらは、脳活動解読と Google 画像検索を併用することで、頭に思い浮かべた画像をインターネット上で検索できることを実証している。 2012年カリフォルニア大学の AG フースらによって、大脳皮質側、頭部を中心とした光視視覚野における意味表層をモデル化の対象とすることで、映像ではなく知覚意味内容を解読できることも示された。2013年日本 ATR の堀川らは、同様の技術を睡眠中の人脳活動に応用し、夢の知覚意味内容を解読することにも成功した。人間の自由意志は、複数の選択肢が、想像として人間の視覚野に表示され認識されると思われる。同じように、人間の夢知覚も知覚像として、人間の視覚野に表示され認識されると思われる。そうであれば、最近のfMRIは、脳内思考内容の視覚化が、明晰ではないにしてもある程度可能なので、夢知覚でさえ、その視覚像が表示されるはずだ。そもそも、自由意志の存在や人間の意識が確固とした存在感を持つのは、その裏付けとなる視覚像が人間の視覚野に表示され認識されるからである。不運にして精神疾患を発症された人が妄想を訴えられる時に冷静時ではその妄想に説明不能な部分があることを自認されるのに妄想を確信されるのはやはり人間の視覚野に妄想内容が表示され認識されるからである。夢は幻想に近いものだとしても、夢知覚した人間がそれを覚え、視覚像として想起できるなら、それは疑似実態であり、fMRIでも出力される。もし、自由意志や意志が唯物論者の言うように幻想であるなら、唯物科学として設計されたfMRIが幻想を検知し出力するはずはない。しかし、fMRIで人間の自由意志での選択される想像が画像として出力されるなら、唯物論者は自由意志を認めざるを得ない。fMRI による脳内思考の可視化で、自由意志や意識は確実に存在する。投稿者は、金儲け目的で投稿しているわけではないから、視聴者の増減は無視できる。投稿の目的は、投稿者の達成感を得るのが第一であり、投稿自体を仕事にはしない。なぜなら、投稿内容は、時代を切り開く役割のために、新規かつ斬新なものにならざるを得ず、そんなアイデアを毎日創出できるほど、投稿者の脳は、常習的、機械的ではない。